Ever young Mikola saw things for what they were. He knew that his bloodline was tainted, his roots mired in madness. A tragedy if ever there was one. That he would feel compelled to renounce everything when the blame lay squarely with the mother.
Queen Marika was driven to the brink.
The mad taint of their newfound strength triggered the shattering.
Marika has always been mysterious in her motives. Shadow of the Erdtree put a lot into perspective about what her motives could be, but there's still one mystery that's been driving me mad. Godwin. I'm Moxie, and this is Heavy Speculation. The following theories will definitely be more crackpot. As per the title of the series, sometimes there won't be a ton of evidence. However, I feel like the Souls community needs more fun, speculative theories to chew on. If you like Elden Ring lore, remember to subscribe to the channel. It's free, and it helps a ton. In this very special episode, we have none other than Zach from the famous Square Table Gaming, who you might know for the wonderful Elden Lore series that their channel has produced.
Hey Moxie, I'm excited to join the table for this one. I've been a long-time sub for the channel and I've always wanted to branch out into the community, so thank you for inviting me. As you can probably tell from my channel, I try really hard to avoid speculating too much, so going a little bit wild here is going to be a lot of fun for me.
Let us take a leap of faith into madness.
The desire for destruction, change, and becoming may be the expression of overflowing power, pregnant with futurity. My terminus for this is of course the word Dionysian. But it may also be the hatred of the ill-constituted, destitute, and unfortunate, which destroys and must destroy because the enduring, yea, all that endures, in fact all being, excites and provokes it. To understand this emotion, we have but to look closely at our anarchists." End quote.
Friedrich Nietzsche. Have you ever heard of Dionysus? You may know the guy as the Roman god of wine, but he had a cult following for other reasons. Dionysus was the god of both frenzy and madness. We have always assumed that frenzy is separate from the Golden Order, which, honestly, is a safe assumption. It's a destructive force. Frenzy seeks to burn everything away in the yellow chaos flame, to make all one again. This is very different from the Minor Erdtree item, which depicts Marika in a gold, gentle, healing, motherly light. Though as with everything in Elden Ring, I think there is a duality to frenzy. I really want to convey the mindset of frenzy. As presented by Nietzsche, the Dionysian is an outlet for the animal side of man. He believed that the bestial nature needed to be celebrated and acknowledged. We as humans have deep primal urges that we have been predisposed to, such as sexual impulse and violence. Think of gladiatorial combat, which continues to this day in the form of MMA. This calls to mind Dragon Peak, which kind of looks like a coliseum, and how ritual combat extended into the lands between. The dueling shield affirms this idea. An armament once used in ritual combat performed to honor the Erdtree, a custom that had somehow remained within the realm of shadow. The Nietzsche podcast, in the episode Dionysus versus the Crucified by the channel Essential Salts, has a really good hold on the philosophies at play here. And they put it like this.
But rather than plucking this element out, Nietzsche thinks we need to revive it and give it its place within our culture in a healthy manner, where we perhaps do as the Greeks did, put the expression of the beast within man into a ritual context.
It's funny that this is framed as the beast within man, when we have so many characters with beasts within them. Mesmer snakes, the omen horns basically being animal parts, mermaid Godwin, which I don't believe, but it's pretty compelling. Butterfly wing Melania, Radahn's ass being glued to Leonard. Also, they called him a lion, but Leonard's more important. Also, Rykard, but I guess he's technically the beast in that situation.
This bestial side of humanity is reminiscent of the Hornstein culture. As presented by Nietzsche, the Dionysian is an outlet for the animal side of man. Think of somatic therapy, which encourages victims of trauma to connect with their body. The haka is another example, which is a sacred tradition primarily performed by the people native to New Zealand and the Pacific Island nations. This bestial side of humanity is reminiscent of the ancestral spirit culture, which harkens back to the Hornsent origins. As noted by Quaylag, it's almost like the ancestral followers are a revival of these pagan ideas. Beast Horn. The Crucible has a particularly strong influence on the beasts of the Realm of Shadow, causing many to grow horns despite the characteristics of their species. Returning to the thoughts from Essential Salt's Nietzsche podcast.
But Dionysus is another kind of artistic experience entirely, the experience of losing oneself rather than of creating oneself. Ego death, dissolving back into the primordial unity.
A regression back into the One Great. This idea that Essential Salts shared also reminds me of what Melina says about the thorns at the Elden Throne.
The thorns are impenetrable, a husk of the tree's being.
The Japanese retranslation makes this line even more clear that this is speaking of the tree's ego. They are the thorns of rejection. The tree rejects everything from the outside, the husk of its ego. The husk of the tree's ego sounds like an ego death to me. There is this contentness within this sort of mindset with accepting the destruction and the loss of what was. This is reflected in the hefty, frenzied flame pot. The flame of frenzy burns the eyes, but tranquility follows in its wake. May this pot bring salvation to those it strikes.
Dionysus being considered a god of frenzy is interesting, because you don't often associate his whole god of wine and parties demeanor with a word like that, but it absolutely applies. It layers well with Elden Ring, because the Frenzied Flame's whole thing is to let chaos take the world. It's not controlled chaos either, it really is just buck wild. Much like those in the Dionysian cult, the Lands Between had their own pocket communities that embraced chaos and frenzy in order to gain strength. The Frenzied Village is one example, as they seem to live in relative peace, but with the flame they're not suppressing their strength, it's free to explode from their body to protect their home.
As with many things in Elden Ring, I believe that a duality exists within frenzy. There are two sides to frenzy and madness. If these impulses are suppressed, it will eventually manifest within as essentially a form of madness. The Dionysian embraced these aspects and made it their strength in the most tragic way. Christianity wanted to uproot bestial urges because Dionysian was considered to be part of paganism. The suppression continues to this day. I've been deeply invested in the subject for almost 6 weeks now, and really ingrained in the Dionysian versus the Christian. The interpretations of the 2024 Olympic opening ceremony fascinate me. The contrast between Dionysian and Christianity were displayed clearly in the opening ceremony of the 2024 Olympics. Dionysus was depicted with people from all walks of life, which includes drag queens and children. The setting of the theatrical opening ceremony was meant as a representation of the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci, as stated by the producers reported by The Wrap, though this statement was later backpedaled. Quote, "For the festivities segment, Thomas Jolly took inspiration from Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting to create the setting." End quote. This retraction sort of adds to the art of the performance. This was followed by a statement on X from the Olympic Games. Quote, "The interpretation of the Greek god Dionysus makes us aware of the absurdity of violence between human beings." End quote. And many Christians were rightfully outraged by the performance seemingly scorning the divinity of the Last Supper. An article by Vatican News reported that the French bishops lamented the, quote, "scenes of derision and mockery of Christianity, which we deeply deplore," end quote. This caused so much of an uproar that almost every social media and television outlet in the United States and other countries suppressed the opening ceremony by issuing a slew of DMCA strikes. However, that is the point of art, to make a societal and cultural commentary. As reported by AP News, Barbara Butch, the DJ in the center of the table, was threatened with extreme violence resulting in the intervention of the French police. I strongly condemn violence and choose to engage with the commentary being made by Thomas Jolly. The French are notorious for being revolutionary. The Last Supper was one of the final events before the age of Christianity exploded in the European culture. Dionysus being depicted in this manner calls into question the frenzied state of our current world, and the age to come, albeit in an extremely shocking way. The irony of suppressing the opening ceremony plays into the art, and into the history of the Dionysian cult itself. The pagan gods were killed off in the lore, so to speak, to make way for Christianity. Dionysian was plucked out of the European culture, much like the Rune of Death was plucked out of Elden Ring. And much like how bestial urges were suppressed in the new, reformed Roman Catholic culture, the pillar of suppression implies very much the same thing. The very center of the lands between, all manners of death wash up here, only to be suppressed. The goal of the Dionysian is to make the world worthless, and this is where man's value is found. This destruction is then transformed. I had a hunch going to the DLC that Marika was frenzied, and I think that it's always been an assumption in the community that Marika was led by the Two Fingers. All the fingers assigned to her children are two fingers. At least the top of the Divine Towers insinuate that, because that is where the Great Runes are claimed. The Round Table Hold, which is led by Enya and the Two Fingers, guides us to claim the Elden Ring, as Marika intended. And yet, who were the Two Fingers that led Marika?
I have touched them. The words of the Three Fingers.
While Frenzy is definitely separate from the Golden Order, that doesn't mean it's separate from the Greater Will and the Two Fingers. Frenzy originates from the Three Fingers, which is basically a deformed Two Fingers. The Two Fingers are supposed to be emissaries of the Greater Will, but the Three Fingers seem to act as an antithesis to its ideology. The Three Fingers are dedicated to reversing the flow of life by burning it all to the ground. As divined by the Finger Maiden Hyetta from the Three Fingers,
all that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the Greater Will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
basically the Three Fingers are the edgy teenagers of the Finger family who listened to a little too much screamo and dug the aesthetic more than the message. The Greater Will created life. The Two Fingers guided it by discerning the words of the Greater Will, supposedly. And the Three Fingers seek to put an end to existence as it sees all of existence as a mistake. Burn it all down, give it back to the cosmos. The ultimate goal of Frenzy is convergence, not unlike the Primordial Crucible, which also has a darker yellow hue. Which is interesting. Hadn't thought of that before. The main difference is that of perspective, like Shabriri, who believes we burn it all down and converge for the sake of chaos, while Muriel sees convergence as a means by which we can better understand the universe. After all things can be conjoined.
The cherishing fingers are essential to keep in mind when looking at both the runes of Deo and the runes of Rhea. Cherishing fingers. The deer fingers look after their mother, or perhaps merely that is what the mother wishes to believe. These fingers protect this bell in the middle, a hollow pale blue, hole-laden bell, which sounds more like a didgeridoo. These bells each give this crimson and cerulean seeds. The Erdtree seed of this talisman was presumed to be an object of myth. This age-old artifact also depicts the Two Fingers, perhaps harkening back to the birth of the Erdtree. And the only other thing to even mention pale blue in the base game is Starlight Shards. Starlight Shards, an ephemeral silver that gives off a pale blue glow, what remains of a passing flash of starlight. Another thing to note is that these runes are indicative of a duality. At Deo, the atmosphere is golden and there are white snakes everywhere, and Rhea is decorated with blue sparkles and black snakes. Finger creepers scurry about with their mothers. Snakes curl up and sleep. There is certainly a vibe to these places. Another thing that's noteworthy is that grace does not exist on the soil of these ruins, and yet there's still something that bothers me. Where did the Three Fingers come from? I don't think one can simply write off the presence of the Three Fingers below Lindell. They are locked in this tomb, behind these weird fleshy doors. Something I noticed while looking at Vike's armor is that the fingerprints wrap around his head, his torso, and his waist. There is no other way that the fingers could have grabbed Vike than from behind.
Also, Vike was fingered with his armor on. We have to be naked to be embraced by the three fingers. So why does Vike have the fingerprints on his armor? Was he unwillingly touched?
That's a good point, Benoon. But comparing this to Marika's crucified body, the left side of her head, her waist, and the outside of her arm are all damaged. It appears that she could have been grabbed in the same manner. The problem with this is that the original story trailer of Elden Ring, we get a view of the side of her head of Marika's face, and the shattering of the Elden Ring cracked her own body. On the other hand, Radagon's body lights up from within, and it radiates this yellow-red glow. Looking at the Skibidi tree, there is literally goo leaking from it that has the same yellow and red. Shabriri was punished for the crime of slander, and I couldn't help but wonder what he could have said to be accused of such a thing. Shabriri's woe, disturbing likeness of a man whose eyes have been gouged out. The corners of his mouth are upturned in a flirtatious manner. It is said that the man named Shabriri had his eyes gouged out for the punishment of the crime of slander, and, with time, the blight of the flame of frenzy came to dwell in the empty eye sockets. The most important thing to be noted here is that Shabriri was put through excruciating pain, and then frenzy inhabited him as its vessel. It's unclear where the three fingers fit into all this.
I think Shabriri's crime of slander was against the nomadic merchants. These people came from outside the lands between, possibly in those boats we can find on the southern coast. And they just wanted to travel the land selling their wares. If there were an easy target for Shabriri to use in order to give the frenzied flame more power, it would be these people. Because of Midra's Manse being closed off, the Golden Order is well aware of how dangerous the flame is, and all Shabriri needed to do in order to give his plans a little kickstart was tell the right people that the nomadic merchants treated the flame as their god. What happened after that was the Golden Order essentially rounded up every merchant they could find and buried them alive in the catacombs. At some point, it's discovered that Shabriri was lying about these people, and he's put on trial for slander, probably by Praetor Reitgard. And when they gouge out his eyes as his sentencing, everyone sees that the flame resided in him all along. Meanwhile, Shabriri is smiling because his plan worked. The merchants, now buried alive essentially, discover the fingerprint stone shield. Part of the tomb of an ancient god, the readerless fingers relayed their message through these imprints, said to be the very seeds from which frenzy sprouted. The merchants are each afflicted with frenzy. It spreads through their community, and suddenly the three fingers have more influence. From here, the flame can make its way up to the lands between, at least a little bit, which is why we find frenzied settlements.
The question here is, who did Shabriri whisper these claims to?
Whose ear was high enough in the Order to make them act on this information? What if Marika or Radagon themselves weren't frenzied, but the embodiment of frenzy was one of their trusted advisors? What if Shabriri had the ear of Radagon, a Golden Order fundamentalist, and he helped influence the power of the frenzied flame by manipulating the Second Elden Lord? This slots right in with your observation that the body of Radagon looks as if it could be related to frenzy, because it starts at where his ear would be. Maybe he wasn't completely afflicted, but the influence is right there. If Shabriri could push Radagon and his fundamentalist beliefs further and further, little by little, making Radagon more and more militant, he could sow the seeds of unrest, which would eventually result in people losing faith in the Order and turning toward a new god. A god that wants to burn it all away and start fresh. By doing this, Shabriri gets closer and closer to finding the Lord of Frenzied Flame that he knows will let chaos rule the world. This is what Shabriri does, manipulate and body hop, so he himself is a never-ending cycle leading those in power to steer the world toward his ends.
Nothing directly states that the two fingers were working for Marika or Radagon, and it's not like the two fingers are really reliable sources.
The words of the two fingers cannot be trusted. Truly, naught but rambling, senile delusions. I believe that when the Elden Ring was shattered, the two fingers were corrupted, their guidance skewed. Even worse, the fingers harbor no love for our kind. That's the part that irks the most.
And the Lord's divine fortification. Gideon gained true knowledge after his long exchange with the two fingers, discovering all that had been broken long ago. that the trembling fingers bent with age and the Erd tree itself were no exception.
I'd go as far as to argue that the fingers are actively circumventing Marika's will. Grace guides us to the demigods in the Erd tree, which makes it easy for the fingers to lie to us about its purpose. The fingers don't know what to do next, and allowing us to struggle to become Elden Lord gets us off their back. However, once we make it to the foot of the Erd tree, the fingers go silent. This is the time where they should have an explanation as to how we become Elden Lord, but they don't, because they never really wanted us to make it this far. From that point on, Grace leads us, the fingers don't. Marika guides us to the flame, through Farum Azula, and back to Lanedell, where she awaits us. Much like Ranni, who rebelled against her fingers, it seems as though Marika never wanted to listen to their influence either.
Let us return to the Land of Shadow. Deep within the Shadowkeep is a small room holding the Dragon Domain painting. It's funny because I was like, no way that this is everything down here. I hit a couple walls and I gave up after exploring the rest of the map. I got really frustrated and I asked Banoon how to get to that one part of the map.
Just bonk the wall behind the painting.
Bro, no way I didn't bonk one wall and that ends up being the wall. No way! After climbing in the coffin and yeeting myself off the cliff, I ended up in the ruins of Unt. It's important to note that this is the only way to access this area of the map, through the Shadowkeep, same as the Hinterlands.
I love this because it implies that everyone was on the same page that this place needed to be hidden. Hornset and Golden Ore were like, nope, seal it off, to hell with that place.
Yes, exactly. There's also tons of furnaces, and after another yeet of the old hefty furnace pot, it revealed the inside, flowers, just like the ones in the Hinterlands. There's a weird altar and a spell in the building. The altar is a place where the sheathed stone sword can be unsheathed to reveal the Sword of Darkness. This altar of darkness is at the entrance to the Abyssal Woods. Giant Golden Arc, sorcery of the Inquisitors of the Tower, wielded as an incantation of the spiral. A swing of the arm releases a giant golden arc. The arc resembles the barb, a known symbol of Course of Questioning. So something interesting about this item is that it implies that the arc that Marika was crucified on could have been from a big Inquisitor, if you think about it. The Elden Beast also shoots the golden arcs during the fight. So did the Elden Beast coercively question Marika? Was he sent down by the Greater Will as an Inquisitor? It's a bit of a ridiculous thought, but it does open the floor to a connection between the Inquisitors and the Elden Beast, or even the Greater Will. This item sets the tone of the area that we will come back to later. The Bacchae is an ancient Greek play told by Dionysus of his own birth. Dionysus was a young god and big mad that he was denied a place of honor as a deity in the house of Cadmus. Cadmus was the king of Thebes. You know, that one place in Hercules. The current king of Thebes is Pentheus. Dionysus wanted revenge, but first he needed a following, and who better than to get a load of fangirls dedicated to you? He traveled around gathering his cult to return for his revenge on the house of Cadmus. Let's put a pin in that and come back around to it later. Let's go back to Recluse's River. Way downstream is the Darklight Catacombs, which is the only catacombs which does not have a visage of the Death Prince, but an entirely new area of the map. Talk about a reward. Jory the Inquisitor is waiting to interrogate me, and I ain't finna say nothing without a lawyer. Obviously, I hopped on Torrent to ride through the Abyssal Woods. Once Torrent realized what's happening, he noped the fuck out. I tried to resummon him because I thought I got hit or something, because it was just so abrupt. The Spectral Seed is frightened and cannot be summoned. Huh. This must have something to do with the Mad Craftsman cookbook. Spirits are eternal, and yet Frenzied Flame melts them away regardless. No wonder the horn scent forbid the flame's use. The water here is tainted with red and yellow, and it immediately reminded me of the swamp that's summoned by Morgott in his final boss fight, but also of the swamp in the Albinauric village. Neither of these swamps are quite the same though. There's an abandoned church without so much as a decapitated Marika. On a pedestal where she would normally be standing is nothing. almost as if someone was trying to remove Marika from being associated with this place entirely. From the looks of it, the church is built from the same architecture and design as the Church of Consolation, the Church of Benediction, the Church of the Crusade. Outside the church is a map called Abyss. Map of the Abyss at the east of the Greysite Plain. A thick forest sprawls at the depths of the ravine that is untouched even by sunlight, known as the Sanctum of Sage Midra, and is a region forbidden by the Hornsent. This place as a whole is abandoned. Almost no one is here in the Abyssal Woods, aside from the untouchable ones and the Inquisitors. It straight up reminds me of what is said in Shadow Realm Rune 6. In a long-forgotten place, where none would tread, the light of grace quietly grew ever more brilliant. There are too many connections to overlook it so easily. Using Frenzy Flame and even resisting Frenzy requires high faith. The colors associated with Golden Order incantations are yellow, but more of a pale yellow. Frenzy is extremely yellow, and even has touches of red within it. Surging Frenzied Flame. Spirit Grave Stone burned by the Frenzied Flame. Spirits are eternal, and yet Frenzied Flame melts them away regardless. No wonder the Hornset forbid the flame's use. Frenzy can also burn our physical bodies, which happens when we take Frenzy from the Three Fingers. This is really eerie considering the hefty furnace pot item description, which reads, "The furnace flame burns away both body and soul. When impurity is thus expunged, one calls it cleansing." Obviously, the flame is very red, which is similar to the red that comes from Frenzy. It's almost as if Madness and Mesmer's flame are two sides of the same coin, or perhaps one and the same. Consider the furnace visage, a smaller imitation of the furnace golem's visage. A stone mask surrounded by curled horns depicting the fell god of fire that haunts the sagas of the Hornsent. The Fat Inquisitors also have the same symbol as the fire giant's eye, and on Mesmer's symbol.
If you think about how Mesmer likely impaled so many giants in the mountaintops, it's pretty wild that these connections keep popping up. It makes you wonder if the Purge of the Giants was partially about protecting the Erd Tree, and partially about Mesmer trying to get rid of his flame altogether since he hated it so much. Burn, O flame. The fire giants borrowed from the power of a fell god, and still they were defeated. Yet their failure released them from their solitary curse, to serve as keepers of the flame for eternity. Perhaps this was Marika's last attempt to free her son from the abyssal serpent, but realizing that she may one day need the flame as a contingency against the beast that held the shackles of godhood, she chose this over her son. This led to Mesmer's banishment and the never-ending purge of the Land of Shadow.
Dionysus is going to get revenge on Pentheus, so he took all the ladies of Thebes to the mountains, to the biggest rave of the year. The old king Cadmus and his homie Tiresias go to the mountains to go to the rave, of course. King Pentheus is like, where are all the ladies at? This celebration in the mountains was for the ladies to let out their more bestial side. And Pentheus was all, what the heck? So he goes to the mountains with the cops and arrests everyone. You're all under arrest and everyone is going out of the station.
Truly maidenless behavior, if you ask me. But perhaps this is a connection to Shabriri as well. The Tarnished come to the lands between with no maidens to speak of. Vari makes it sound like we are maidenless, but not a single Tarnished we meet has a maiden. So where did all the finger maidens go? You could argue they were all killed by bloody fingers, and sure, that could be the case. But it seems like a Tarnished is meant to slay their own finger maiden for Moog. Maybe Shabriri is the one who took the maidens from the lands between in an attempt to create a maiden of the three fingers. Problem is, you can't convert a maiden. You have to find a girl with the potential and get to them early. This is how Shabriri breathes life back into Irina, reviving her as Hyetta, and setting her on the path to become the very first Maiden of Frenzy.
Including this guy, Dionysus. Pentheus doesn't know that this guy is Dionysus. To him, he's just some mysterious foreigner who got all the ladies to dance at the rave, and he brings them back to the station for interrogation, and Dionysus is all, I ain't saying nothing without a lawyer. Am I being detained? So they chain him to an angry bull. We'll see what Dionysus is up to later. Speaking of dancers. Dancer's dress. Bright red dress of the Rana dancers. The dance of Rana is one of burning passion, and the most passionate dancers never allow the fiery dance to end, losing even their names as they dance on. To see the passion fade is to see the dancer's flame extinguished. And this seems to align with the culture the blue dancer came from. This culture is associated with the blind swordsman who sealed the ancient god of Rod. Perfumed oil of Renah. The dancers of Renah keep these concealed as they dance, marking the height of their passion with an explosion of searing flame and sweet, enticing scents. This fire is the same color as the Flame of Ruin, somehow. Then again, it's just kind of like normal flame color. A little detail around the edges of the bottle are these little eyeballs. The silverwork on the bottle definitely calls to mind the Curseblade Cirque in my head. Going back to the Abyssal Swamp, there's a few things worth noting. The gravestones in the graveyard area have holes in them, which serves as a connection between the gravestones found in both Altus Plateau and Castle Morn. The untouchable ones are basically winter lanterns from Bloodborne. And for those of you who do not know, winter lanterns were an experiment. And an interesting detail is that winter lanterns will constantly damage you and build up your frenzy meter with their gaze. It's the same in Elden Ring. This implies that these guys could have been the scholars of the Manse. Here's what we know from the Aged One's exaltation. A talisman depicting the exaltation of the aging untouchable, whose head resembles a sprig of grapes. Gift your madness to our Lord. Bless our brethren with grapes. Take care that these fully ripen. This might be a reference to the Japanese Kagare, which are considered the outcasts of society. Rare Earth has a really great video explaining this concept. These outcasts weren't even on the country census. They weren't hired for jobs, and no one in society even wanted to associate with these people. Let's switch our train of thought for a second. Mikla and Godwin were both good old golden boys, but each had their own reason. Mikla wanted to cure his sister's scarlet rot, and Godwin was, well, we just know that he fought against the dragons on behalf of the Golden Order until he befriended Fortisax. A theory brought to me by my good old friend Rom before the lore theorists went hog wild with Mikla may have been trying to woo Godwin the same way that he does with Radahn. This is perhaps why Mikla crafted the Golden Epitaph, a sword made to commemorate the death of Godwin the Golden, first of the demigods to die, infused with the humble prayer of a young boy. Oh brother, Lord brother, please die a true death. So perhaps Mikla messed up the first time, right?
I used to be on the same train, but now I'm thinking there was an ulterior motive here. If Mikla and Radahn had this agreement pre-shattering, maybe he thought giving Godwin a true death would free up Radahn from holding the stars back. He stops Deathblight from spreading across the land, and he gets his brother husband. Win-win. While Shabriri is one possible foil to Dionysus, taking the women away to party, I actually think this draws a close connection to Godwin as well. Maybe Marika sees him as flouncing about with his local women, doing nothing with his divinity. I think this because Kenneth Haidt claims he could have been the leader of Limgrave by right, technically, and it's theorized that Godwin took plenty of consorts. Think Squizgar from Metalocalypse, who's probably a solid analog for Godwin. So here's Godwin, the Golden Son who could do no wrong, clearly doing wrong by diluting the blood of the Golden Order. A crime that may be worthy of death.
Back to Dionysus. He breaks free of the palace and destroys it with an earthquake and fire.
Much in the way a flame from underground could come to the surface and destroy the land.
A herdsman comes and reports that he saw the women on the mountaintops acting really freaking weird at the rave. These ladies were cracked out, suckling from animals, wandering around the forest, and braiding snakes into their hair. They wanted to capture a celebrant they recognized, Pantheus's own mother.
Where else does Elden Ring give us a mountaintop full of women acting strangely? Dominula, the Windmill Village, where the celebrants dance in a frenzy. Not of the frenzied flame, but of murder. These celebrants kill gods and stitch together their remains for the Godskin nobles, making it possible that this village was under the command of the Gloam-Eyed Queen, another demigod that may be Melina, who's burned him bodiless, possibly due to Marika having Mesmer use his flames against her. Where was I going with this again? Right, Godwin. Basically, Marika doesn't give two shits about her kids. Offing Godwin is not at all out of the realm of possibility for her. Ranni couldn't have handled Malekith on her own. Reitgard helped her, the Black Knives helped her, and I believe Marika helped her. How would she steal a piece of the Rune of Death if Marika didn't allow it?
How could Marika be convinced to do such an act? Could it be frenzy? At the end of the Abyssal Swamp stands Midrash Manse. As pointed out by Hawkshaw, Manse is defined as a house provided for a minister of certain Christian churches, especially the Scottish Presbyterian Church. I immediately recognized this manse as being part of the Hornsent culture upon its construction. There is the same kind of Byzantine roofs, the same color brick. The metal doors are made of the same material and even has the same depictions as Belorat. There are incense lanterns hanging almost everywhere.
Come no closer. No closer, I say. The man is worse.
Dude immediately notices your presence. There's a friendly horn-scent stranded spirit ready to greet me.
I welcome you, O uninvited guest. But must I warn, as you venture in, heed the words of our great master Midra. Approach not the madness, lest ye succumb.
Sounds like a scientist speaking to his underlings. Don't come any closer. I literally have radiation poisoning, so maybe Midra was teaching the horn-scent about glimpsing into the flame. A sinister prophecy, if you will. These horn-scent ate together, they experimented together, they studied together. This guy was probably teaching this stuff. There's literally desks and books strewn everywhere. It's very clear that this was basically a library and a laboratory for the horn-scent. All the books are on the floor and burned. Very Library of Alexandria. There's the lecture hall and the dining hall. Part of the manse was dedicated to experimentation, as there are various bottles and herbs strewn about the shelf. The sheer amount of empty canvases tells me that some of the students could have been artists. Perhaps these students were gifted for their Renaissance talents, and maybe they had many. There's a story of students who lived and worked together in the pursuit of learning. My gut tells me that they weren't always studying frenzy, but there was a shift. This is affirmed by the painting that hangs in the entrance of the manse. Within this painting, it shows the manse before it was tainted with frenzy. There are flowers blooming everywhere, just like the hinterlands. Given Marika's association with the hinterlands being her literal home, it's incredibly puzzling that both ruins of Unt and now the manse prior to frenzy had these flowers. Between the missing statue in the abandoned church and the fact that the flowers that were in the hinterlands are now gone is really suspicious. The etymology for Nanaya comes from a Mesopotamian god of love, as so eloquently highlighted by Eric's Lore, which discusses the etymology of many words in Elden Ring. Nanaya is wearing clothing very much in the same style as the dancers. The dancers' heads are covered, and they have different kinds of beads that dangle. There's also the fact that dancer Rana, Tanith, and Nanaya all have black hair. Big shout out to Slavsky on X for featuring this photo. I heard it first from Quaylag on one of her streams, and I think she may have heard it from Zuli the Witch. Anyway, here's another interesting thing about Nanaya's attire. In addition to the dancer's look, she's actually wearing horn-scent fabrics. In the painting, her eyes look brown and dark. The dancer and Tanith both have yellow eyes, however, when we find Nanaya here, her eyes are seemingly missing. Did someone steal them? To be frank, I think that Nanaya still looks pregnant, and that's the narrative I'm sticking with, though I do like the theory put out by Elden Kings that Marika was a child of Nanaya and Midra. However, Marika is a shaman. In Nanaya's lap lays Nanaya's torch, a torch made by attaching a dying flame of frenzy to a small spinal column. In a distant land, in an age long past, was born a man who failed to become a lord of frenzy flame. All that remains of him is cradled gently by Nanaya. This item makes it clear that this torch was the spine of someone who wasn't from here. I made sure that the Japanese says as much, and it does. It happened far away. Guys, it says the flame is from a distant land. It's from a distant land. I think that this is how the frenzy made it to this land.
Also, Midra has his spinal column still attached. So, it's not his.
Bonfire VN posted a video that makes it super clear that Midra has his spine intact. How do you think that man can hold out his arms and stand straight up? He needs a spine. Guys, I get it says cradled. She is holding it when we find her, but it's like as big as the player's spine. This isn't her baby, and that's not Midra's spine either. Now, remember, Dionysus was depicted as a traveler. No one knew who he was. It came to Greece from travelers. So this being some nobody from outside the lands between, while not flashy or exciting, aligns with the mythology of Dionysus himself. So here's what I'm thinking. Nanaya was smart, and she believed in this flame. The other dancers are already associated with flame, so this makes sense. She adapts her culture to mesh with the horn scent. She comes to the manse and woos Midra. They're chilling when she whips out the flame and is like, you like studying stuff? Look at this weird flame. It's weird, right? And Midra's like, dang girl, what is that?
This is where I want to make a distinction. Personally, I don't think Nanaya knew what she had with this flame. It clearly held power, and I can get on board with this interpretation of her presenting it to Midra, but I don't believe she was a maiden of the Three Fingers or anything like that. She wanted to know what was up with this artifact that was perhaps passed down to her, and bringing it to a scholar was her best chance of figuring out its history. This would be exactly what the flame wants. We know this thing has a will of its own, and if it wants you in control of your own actions, you will be. Just as we can choose what to do after taking the flame and don't lose all control of our player character. The flame didn't frenzy Nanaya because it needed her to deliver it to someone who had the potential to become the Lord of Frenzied Flame.
All the Inquisitors and these frenzied lords call into question Vike. Vike figured out how to control the flame to basically be able to snipe people with it. Frenzied Burst. In times past, every single person who attempted to control the flame of frenzy succumbed to the madness after a desperate internal struggle. This incantation is a testament to a meager victory, and the Inquisitors of the Abyssal Swamp can cast this incantation. Not just one, but many of them. And so, the natural conclusion would be that the Inquisitors are high in faith, and they aren't against using it themselves.
Or they've already lost to the frenzy by the time we get there.
Inquisitor's Girandol, instrument of torture used on nobles behind the curtain at Volcano Manor of Mount Gelmir. Its numerous spikes pierce the flesh, then singe the wounds with flame. The smell of burnt blood induces despair in the victims, a candlestick conceived by a thorough mind. Remembrance of the Lord of Frenzied Flame states, as the golden barbs inflicted the eternal agony upon him, Midra held fast to Nanaya's entreaty. Endure. That word was curse.
Life endures. Births continue. There is beauty in that. Is there not?
Marika's Soreseal. Solemn duty weighs upon the one beholden, not unlike the 9 curse from which there is no deliverance. I think it's important to note here that the Soreseals look like the Shiburi grapes, same colors and all. Returning to Midra, he has stitches all over his body. However, I found this while filming the close-ups on my own. Here's what I think about the stitching. Piercing itself might be a ritual. Considering Ash's warlike seppuku, spear call ritual, Mesmer's ability to summon spears from the ground, it feels like there's a connection between piercing the body and a ritual. This also casts a curious light on Melania at the Battle of Aeonia, Mohg's communion with the Mother of Truth, and even whatever is piercing Marika herself. Mikla's needle is able to stave off outer gods, and if you wanted to go back on the Flame of Frenzy ending and continue an alternate questline, you had to follow Millicent's questline to the bitter end. And so, perhaps Midra was stitched with the needle like this. Maddinghand is dressed as Gravebird, which is oddly reminiscent of the Raven Mount. This Gravebird's black quill armor states, featuring a cape of the Deathbird's feathers. Gravebirds are ancient golems created to guard the spirit graves built where all manners of death ultimately drift. The Raven Mount act like Gravebirds by jumping and stabbing their prey, but this guy has a real thing, actual Deathbird feathers on his armor. The Gravebirds are present all over Bellarat and Anir Lim, but here's showing a fundamental difference between the Inquisitors and the Gravebirds. This guy carries a Maddinghand, a glove stitched together with the flayed skin of victims of a butcherous bloodbath, forged of an unyielding black impulse toward revenge fostered in those who were hunted down as heretics by their own brethren. These are the weapons of the utterly downtrodden. Madding's spear hand strike makes hand into the shape of a spear before unleashing a plunging stab that penetrates the body of the enemy, afflicts foe with a large dose of madness. This item directly ties the ideas of stitching and plunging together, and this brings us to Midra. The Great Sword of Damnation, golden great sword that pierced the body of Midra, Master of the Manse, used by the Hornset in an execution of damnation like no other. The barbs that pierce the victim from within wind gently around the blade. Golden crux. There is something of the Golden Order in the sight of those fixed upon this crux. I even double-checked with Last Protagonist to ensure that the Japanese was correct. The Japanese retranslation is something like, it resembles the Golden Order in some respects. Latin crux is a generic meaning, a tree, frame, or other wooden instruments of execution on which criminals were impaled or hanged, and specifically a cross. So the literal sword itself is a crux, but also the pose made by the golden crux is these outstretched arms in a prayer pose. Arms outstretched in prayer is specifically a representation of Christ's cross. This is kind of like the erudition gesture. Some of the Hornset in the near limb, those really annoying ones, they have their arms outstretched in the same manner, so perhaps a double entendre is going on here. Why even include this line unless the developers wanted to associate the Golden Order with this Inquisition? If we really investigate the item, it reveals a few things. First, when leaping into the air, the wielder strikes a pose which feels very familiar. The pose looks like Marika on her crucifixion. This leap up and strike down is also very much like the strike Radagon does in the boss fight. Another thing that I noticed that doesn't quite fit anywhere is that Hayata's pendant on her cloak is very much like the sigil that Midra wears, and that also appear on the frames of the paintings. So this could indicate a fixed hierarchy within Frenzy, which is somewhat resembles the Order of sorts. Let us return to Dionysus' play, the Bacchae. Dionysus, who is still in disguise as a foreigner, convinces Pentheus to go and scope out the lady rave in the mountains in disguise as ladies. Pentheus' frenzy meter is already building up. He thinks that the sky has two suns and that he can rip up the mountains with his bare hands. Pentheus begins to see through this mysterious foreigner's disguise, and even starts seeing horns from the foreigner's head. It is very much akin to the aspects of the Crucible, particularly thorns. In an age long past, before this land was enshrouded in shadow, the vitality of the Crucible flourished. And here's the thing, the divine birds directly reference something called the Golden Crucible. Marika betrayed the Horn Scent as stated by the Horn Scent themselves.
The Earth Tree is my people's enemy. By Marika long betrayed, set aflame.
During the Night of the Black Knives, Godwyn the Golden was slain, and Marika's own child was murdered by a coup directly by Ranni the Witch. In Ranni's own words,
Queen Marika was driven to the brink.
This led to Marika choosing to shatter the Elden Ring, while Radagon attempted to repair it, as stated by Marika's hammer. But that's just it, isn't it? It was Marika's hammer, and she won. The Elden Ring did indeed shatter, but really stop and think about this for a second. The Elden Ring itself holds together the laws of the world, the rules, and the order. Marika resorting to shattering the Elden Ring is a form of madness in itself. Also, consider the fact that Marika herself had undergone immense pain and suffering. As we know from the many instances of frenzy, it cultivates wherever there is immense suffering.
In Marika's own words, hear me, demigods. My children, beloved, make of thyselves that which ye desire, be it a lord, be it a god. But should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices.
Pentheus wants to get a better view of things, so the mysterious foreigner bends down a tall tree using his divine powers. Then, without any warning, Dionysus reveals himself, calling out to his followers, directing them toward Pentheus, stranded in the tree. The women became frenzied, forcing Pentheus down from the tree. Once he was down, the followers, led by his own mother, tear Pentheus apart, limb by limb. Let's get into the part where we begin to heavily speculate. Marika was Numen, and so were the assassins who slayed Godwyn. The assassins that carried out the deeds of the Night of the Black Knives were all women, and rumored to be Numen who had close ties with Marika herself. They are cloaked, and you cannot see their face, even if they had one, as they appear to be invisible. There is no real reason that this association exists between Marika and the assassins. These assassins killed her own child, right? What if this clan had the ability to resist frenzy, even came to worship the god of frenzy? It's not necessarily verifiable, but the train of thought starts to click into place.
Ever young Mikola saw things for what they were. He knew that his bloodline was tainted, his roots mired in madness, a tragedy if ever there was one, that he would feel compelled to renounce everything when the blame lay squarely with the mother.
Hearing this from Ymir increased my suspicions. Once again, last protagonist confirmed that the translation for madness was the same use as frenzy madness. Count Ymir is essentially telling us that Mikola's heritage was involved with madness. We have Morgott vomiting up yellow and red. Milk's blood magic is golden red. Radahn burns up after the first phase with red and yellow flames. I think each of these are a form of madness being suppressed. There are 2 fingers within the round table, which is where I believe Marika's essence is hidden. The Staff of the Great Beyond, staff fashioned from the tail fingers of Metyr, the mother of fingers. The microcosm raised aloft over the crux they form. The mother receives signs from the greater will from beyond the microcosm. Despite being broken and abandoned, she kept waiting for another message to come. Given the way Matir is referenced in this description, it is a safe assumption that Ymir is talking about this mother, the mother of all two fingers, and the finger creepers was in turn a magnificently gleaming daughter of the Greater Will, and the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between. Could Godwyn have been slain by Marika's hand?
Do you recall what I said? That Marika and the fingers that guided her were unsound from the start? Well, the truth lies deeper still. It is their mother who is damaged and unhinged. The fingers are but unripe children, victims in their own right.
From this dialogue, it is clear that the mother of the fingers could not have been the ones guiding Marika. Think about it. Marika chose to genocide the Hornsent. Then she threw her children, which reminded her of her sin against the Hornsent, into the sewers. Marika genocided the giants and the Great Caravan. These acts that Marika committed are absolutely unhinged behaviors, so why does none of this mention the three fingers? It's really vague, and I kind of broke my brain over it. We do know one thing, though. These three fingers are confirmed to have been in the Abyssal Swamp and the Manse, marked with fingerprint burns, proof of having been touched directly by the three fingers' embrace. Then, within the Manse are fingers underneath these tarps. This is hidden behind the painting of Midra and Anaya. Then, in the discussion chamber is where the fingers would have likely been born. It's more vibes-based, but there's a ton of hay, which traditionally is where cattle are born and chickens are hatched. But on the pile of hay is a multitude of fingerprints, so what if the Manse made the three fingers? Ymir refers to the fingers as unripe, and it can't help but make me feel some type of way about the fact that the eyeballs touched by the three fingers are considered ripe. Marika would have been aware of grafting, because she is a shaman. They grafted the two fingers to one finger, and then inflicted it with frenzy from the torch brought to this land by Anaya.
I think the concept of having a three fingers be created in the Manse sounds crazy at first. After all, how does one create an emissary of a god? But it makes sense that an experiment like sewing or grafting fingers together could do this. For that matter, it opens up a possibility for multiple three fingers, not just the one we find in the catacombs below Lanedell. I think a couple pieces of evidence could put the nail in the coffin of this theory, starting with the swollen grapes, which directly state that they are from people touched by the three fingers. They're different from other Shabriri grapes and even Vike's grape, and that could be due to them coming from a different three fingers than the one we know. The other detail that I would call out here is the mound of smoldering ash behind Midra when we enter his study to fight him. This ash is already present before the fight, so it's not a result of our clash. I believe you could make a strong case for this ash being all that's left of a three fingers that grasped Midra and passed its flame to him. It faded away just as ours does when we take the flame, and given that it was likely much younger than our fingers, it's reasonable to assume it would leave a bit more behind as it faded away.
There's the entire Abyssal Swamp, which does not change back after a fight with Midra. Things touched by the three fingers don't seem to ever stop being charred, and perhaps the three fingers were thrashing about the Abyssal Swamp until someone came and locked the poor things in a jail cell. No wonder they would have locked them in a cell. There's the fact that someone had to lock away the fingers, right? Maybe the shaman possessed some resistance to frenzy. Perhaps Marika met these fingers because she had to help the Hornsent take care of this problem, or the Hornsent even made the shaman altogether for this purpose. This idea can be taken a step further. Marika could have wanted to make her own frenzy, so she experimented with mesmer. Another thing I picked up is that the boat fires sing. The flames in the Shadow Keep at the end of the Church of the Crusade also have this singing. Here's the kicker. The singing is also present all throughout the Abyssal Swamp. It also opens the floor to a connection between the Abyssal Serpent within Mesmer and the Abyssal Swamp. I really appreciated Smotown's interpretation of the Abyss, and I highly encourage you to check it out. Ymir implies that the mother of Marika and the fingers were both afflicted with madness. Or what if Marika wanted to take power, so she made the three fingers and then killed everyone who was left to retell the tale? She already had influence in this land, as per the statues everywhere. She takes her statue from here and burns all the evidence. Everything was moved from the library to the storehouse, and she cherry picks the tablets that she wanted. So Marika interacts with these fingers, and this interaction led to the betrayal of the horn scent. These fingers could have been leading Marika behind the scenes. It could have led her to genocide the giants, then say horrible things to her children. And here's what I think is interesting. If this is true, then perhaps it wouldn't have been that difficult to persuade Marika to kill Godwin herself. Perhaps she realized that the removal of death was a horrible mistake, and she sacrificed Godwin for that reason. If she was truly unhinged, then perhaps she was doing her weekly genocide and Godwin caught her in the act. If we follow the same conventions as the Bacchae, Godwin could have been coerced in this situation by someone. Perhaps that someone was Miquella. Looking at Miquella's flesh left by the crosses, they are extremely yellow with hints of red, the same as everything else. Perhaps Miquella possessed the curse of eternal youth and frenzy. Considering the Skibidi tree avatars act a lot like the frenzied Miranda flowers, and the eyes within the heads of the sunflowers look like the frenzied rat eyes, I think there is a reason to be suspicious of Miquella. Sunflowers meant devotion and loyalty because of Clytie, a mortal in love with Apollo. She always looked toward the sun, so the gods felt really bad about watching her suffer and turned her into a flower. It is said that that is the reason that the sunflower always faces toward the sun, which, by the way, is totally a myth. Van Gogh laid claim to the sunflower as an artist. Gogh would go on to paint a series of sunflowers while he was in suffering, and is arguably one of the most prized sets of paintings in the world. This was right after Gogh cut off his ear, and he was undergoing his own form of madness, which led to these vivid paintings depicting the entire life cycle of the sunflower. Miquella's motive could have been to Miquella's Godwin first, and perhaps Godwin wouldn't comply. Since Miquella has 4 arms, well, 3, and so does the Skibidi tree avatar. Shout out to Bonfire VN. I do not think it's too far of a leap of logic to suggest that Miquella was the co-conspirator in the Night of Black Knives, and perhaps since there was no vessel for Godwin's soul, his soul died. Maybe the Night of Black Knives required to be done by a god's hand, and somehow it made it different. I'm not sure. What I do think is that Ymir is telling the truth when he says that they are all mad, that there is madness within each of the demigod children, and more certainly, there is an argument to be made about madness within Marika herself. I speculate that Miquella discarded the frenzied flesh, impaled with these crosses that he made of his own following the footsteps of Marika. The duality between sleep and frenzy are polar opposites, down to the icons. I also speculate that Miquella went mad because Marika went mad. Marika had a hand in killing Godwin because of madness itself. In conclusion, the connections between the Bacchae and the events surrounding Godwin and Miquella open up a fascinating web of speculation. The potential influence of the divine madness among the demigods, particularly Miquella, suggests a deeper layer of complexity within the story. While evidence is scarce, the parallels between frenzied elements in the lore and the madness alluded to by Ymir provide compelling hints. Could Miquella have played a role in Godwin's death, driven by a form of madness? And if Marika herself is touched by this madness, what does it mean for the larger narrative of the lands between? These questions push us to reconsider the motivations and the actions of the godlike figures. The idea that Marika might have been coerced into Godwin's demise inspired by the ancient themes of madness and the divine intervention adds a rich mythic layer to the story. The Bacchae inspired this idea, that Marika killed Godwin somehow. I wasn't really sure going into the theory, but there's not a lot of solid ground to stand on. There's so little information on Frenzy itself. What are your thoughts? Am I missing something? Did this make you think of an interesting theory? Share them in the comments below so we can speculate together. Thank you so much to Zach from Square Table Gaming for joining me in my own kind of madness.
Thank you for having me. This was great. I loved getting to put on my tinfoil hat and hash out crazy theories with you. We've seriously got to do this again soon over on my channel. Anyone who's never heard of us before, feel free to check us out. We've got something like over 130 Elden Ring lore videos at this point, because I'm a crazy person and I put out at least one every week. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter, and we have a link to our Discord on the channel.
It was a lot of fun working with you on this one, and you're always welcome to come around here to vent your speculations. More importantly, thank you so much for watching. and I'll see you in the next one.